Good afternoon, students. Here I am, Dr. Godi, the course lecturer for AEM501. And this week, which is week 2, we'll be looking at two different units. That is Unit 2 and Unit 3. Unit 2, we'll be looking at selection and formulation of research hypotheses or research problems. While Unit 3 will be looking at how hypotheses can be developed, how objectives can also be developed, and how we can be able to identify those variables we want to use in our research. These two units are going to present us with important topics. That is to say, the topics are very, very important, and it will guide us and help us in making a very good research as we proceed. I encourage you to please participate and be there to have your good lecture. Thank you. Course lecturer, Dr. Gojogo. This particular week 2, we are going to look at two different units of this particular course because of the range we are expected to cover. All right. So at the end of this particular unit, the student should be able to define a research problem, identify the factors that determine the choice of a research problem, describe the sources of research problem, formulate and evaluate research problem. Students will be able to know what hypothesis is. They should be able to develop hypotheses and, of course, describe hypothesis testing and level of significance, and as well identify types of error in research. And lastly, describe the different types of variables used. 3.1, research problem. The research problem is an account of the major issues that the researcher wants to investigate and explain. Research problem is the main question that the researcher hopes to provide answer to in his study. Adedoyin, 2004, stated that a problem is an interrogative sentence or statement that asks what relation exists between two or more variables and which contains implications for. There are 15 different essential steps that have been identified in the research process. These 15 different steps are: select the field or topic or subject for research, survey the field to comprehend the research problem, develop a bibliography, formulating or defining the problem, differentiating and outlining the elements of the problem, clarifying the elements in the problem according to their relations to data or evidence, determine the data or evidence required, ascertain the availability of data or evidence, testing the solvability of problem, collecting data and information, synthesizing and arranging the data in the manner or preparation in the style that would be suitable for analysis, analyzing and interpreting data, arranging the data for presentation, selecting and using citations, references, and footnotes, developing the form and style of the research exposition. Points to guide the researcher in problem identification. There are different points to guide the researcher in problem identification. That is to say, not all problems that looks like are actually problems. So the points are: the problem should be sufficiently original and does not involve objectivity duplication. The problem must be researchable. The problem must be significant and must be capable of adding new information to existing knowledge, and it should be able to provide solutions to problems. Investigation into the problem must be feasible in the circumstance in which the researcher finds himself or herself. The problem must have a theoretical value, and of course, the problem should avoid issues. Selecting a topic for research. In selecting a topic for research depends on so many factors, and these factors are the nature of interest of the researcher, the limitation and recommendation of previous research in the field of interest, the focus of concern of the organization or department where one works. That is to say, this one is important if this research is being funded by the person's organization. And of course, the interest of the sponsor or agency. That's problem formulation. A problem is an interrogative sentence or statement that asks What relation exists between two or more variables? The answer to the question is what is being sought in the research. The next step would be to satisfy the research problem. The selection of a research topic may be determined by other scientific considerations, and the formulation of the topic into a research problem is the first step in a characteristics of research problems. These are those factors that when we see, we will know whether this is actually a research problem or not. And these characteristics are: the problem must reflect felt needs. The problems are non-hypothetical. That is to say, the research problem must be based on factual evidence in and out, in and not guesswork. 3. Problems suggest meaningful, testable hypotheses. Problems are relevant and manageable. Researchable problem differs from problematic situation. And another characteristic is that is the problem one which perennially causes concern like food shortage? If it causes perennial problem, then we will know whether it's actually a problem that is worth solving or not. Can the effects of a solution to the problem be scientifically enumerated? Is the problem one which can be really solved by the questions? Then it takes us to the criteria for good problem statement. There are basically 3 criteria for good problem statement. And the first one here is the problem should express the relationship between 2 or more variables. And these variables are likely to be dependent and independent variables. The problem should be stated clearly and unambiguous in question form. The problem and problem statement should be such as to imply possibility of empirical conditions that are conducive to the formulation of significant problems. Some of these conditions are: there should be a systematic immersion in the subject matter through first-hand observation, the study of existing literature, and third, there should be discussions with persons who have accumulated much research experience in the field. These are conditions that are conducive for formulation. And when these are taken into consideration, it will truly help in making good, in formulating good, significant factors determining the selection of a problem. The factors that are, these are those factors that determine the selection of a research problem. Number one here is, you will look at the workability. That is to say, this research, can it be achieved within social time, and the money in the hands of funds in the hands of the researcher, can it really help to overcome to complete the research? Then number 2 is the methodology. As much as possible, look at the methodology that is within the understanding of the researcher. Will that be appropriate for that particular research? Then the coverage, it should not be too restricted and not too wide. That is to say, the coverage, the area of study should be that the researcher can be able to carry. And of course, number 4 talks about the interest. That is to say, the researcher must have good interest in that area, and that is what will motivate him to really do this thing, to really carry out the research with all interest. And of course, the 5th one talks about the theoretical value. The work must contribute to knowledge. That is what we are trying to say here. And of course, we see the another factor is the practical value. It must emphasize practical. There is none of such. Problem evaluation. A researcher needs to consider the following in problem evaluation. The first in the problem evaluation is discovering the nature of the problem. Is it capable of being solved through research is a question. Determining the end objectives is also a question. All right. Then, of course, the third one is specifying the possible causes of action to solve the problem. And fourth is to investigate the setting of the problem situation for possible alternatives or alterations and simplification. Types of data. There are different types of data to use in carrying out social research. The first one here is the survey research. Then the second one is through direct observation. The third is through physical trace evidence, and fourth, through document analysis. Okay, and all of these are used in one way or the other in carrying out research. Unit 3. Under Unit 3, we'll be looking at developing hypotheses, objectives, and identification of variables. And at the end of this study, the student should be able to develop hypotheses for the research problem formulated, list the criteria for good hypothesis as type and type of hypothesis. They should be able to describe hypothesis testing and levels of significance, identify types of errors in research, and describe the different types of definition and nature of hypothesis. A hypothesis is a conjectural statement of the relation between two or more variables. Oyegu defines hypothesis as a proposition stating in a testable form the relationship between two or more variables. So when we state a relationship in with two or more variables, especially in a question and an hypothesis, criteria and sources of good hypothesis statement, they must be informed as if then relationship and stated in such manner that their implications and relationship to the problem can be shown logically. They should be stated as simple as possible, both in terms of theoretical complexities and implications, in terms of number of variables. They must be capable of verification or rejection within the limits of the research resources. They must be stated in a manner which provides direction for the research. They must be adequate and efficient in suggesting one or more meaningful solutions to the functions of hypothesis. Hypothesis ensures the optimal use of researchers' valuable time and other scarce resources by limiting the scope of the research. It transforms research questions into testable propositions. It leads to discovery of additions of knowledge and by helping to confirm or disconfirm particular theories or propositions. It determines the types of data needed for an inquiry and suggests the most appropriate instrument for data collection. It suggests the most appropriate methods and tools for the analysis of data. It provides the framework for drawing the conclusion. Types of hypotheses. There are basically two types of hypotheses, which are null and alternative hypothesis. The null states in the form of there is no difference or there is no relationship, while the alternative states is stated in there is a relationship or there is a difference between the two. Hypothesis testing and levels of significance. Hypothesis testing is the basis of studies, is the basis of research. Hypothesis testing is often referred to as significance testing. Tests are made at essentially arbitrary levels of significance. Usually, we have the 5% level and we also have the 1% level. And for convenience sake, the arbitrary standards called level of significance, which are usually used by researchers, is the 5% levels and the 1% of significance. Types of errors. There are two types of errors, the type 1 error and the type 2 error. The type 1 error is committed when the researcher rejects a null hypothesis instead of accepting it. While the type 2 error exists or comes up when the null hypothesis is accepted instead of rejecting the same null hypothesis. Developing the objectives of a research. In deciding a good set of objectives for a research, the following must be taken into consideration. Define the limits of the research project for the researcher, clarify the need of conducting the research, identify the audience, describe the expected product of the research, and now we'll move on to what we call research work plan. The research work plan is a guide showing different activities and the time allotted to each. A good work plan shows when the project begins and when it actually ends, and sometimes it could be stated in tabular form to make it easier for understanding. A work plan assists both the researcher and the funding agency to know how to appropriate their funds. In some research activities, timing is of most paramount importance concern, and that takes us to variables. Variables refer to any aspect of behavior or any condition that change. More specifically, variables are those attributes or objects, events, things, and beings which vary and can be measured. There are different types of variables, which include dependent and independent variables, moderator variables and control variables, intervening variables, qualitative variables, and of course, quantitative variables, continuous and discrete. Having said all this, it is followed by the tutor and mark term assignment. With that, I say thank you.